I returned home late, after 9 in the evening, and found that my loving wife was not at home. She didn't leave a message or leave anything for me to eat. It wasn't the first time she had done this. I realized that this was not the last time. Am I angry? Well, no, not anymore. I've known for a long time that something was going on. Oh, I was probably angry or should have been, at least at first. But what is that old saying, we learn to adapt, or we learn as we go along? See, that's what happened. My name is Chase Royster. I am 26 years old, only 185 centimeters tall, weighing about 90 kilograms. At the age of 18, after graduating from high school, I went to work. I started out as a carpenter. Yes, I just hammered nails. But I got used to it a bit, made friends, made some contacts, and took a step forward. About a year and a half ago, I became an independent person. I didn't have much, very little money, but I started living on my own anyway. There are many people, well, not very many, but enough, who have bought real estate and are looking for someone who could build something for them. I'm not Frank Lloyd Wright, of course, but I can build a separate lobby, a two-story house, or a farm as well as any other. I'm doing well, yes, really well, and I have friends, subcontractors, who are also trying to get out on their own. It works for me. Okay, you know about me. Why am I late every night? It's June, the weather is good, and if I don't do it now, when will I do it? Now about my wife. A cheerful little brown-haired woman with brown eyes. A well-built beauty who thought she knew me and my schedule. Unfortunately, she thought she knew a lot more. That's what happened. Susan, my wife, is 2 years younger than me. We met and dated in high school. I fell in love and thought that she had fallen in love with me too. Who knows, maybe it was like that. She graduated from high school and we got married. Susan comes from a dysfunctional family. She and her younger brother were raised by a single mother who worked 2 part-time jobs to support herself. So after graduating from high school, Susan had virtually no opportunities. We got married, and for the first year I continued to hammer nails while Susan worked, as you may have guessed, at Walmart. Everything was fine with us. There were no children yet, and we didn't plan to have them until we put some aside for home. Then Susan had some ideas. She said she wanted to improve and that she wanted to go to college. I was all for it, and we got her into a local college nearby. Susan liked it. She decided that she wanted to continue her studies and study for 4 years. Not very good at mathematics, but being an avid reader, she chose something from psychology. She said that after getting a degree in psychology, she could get a job in the local government or at some school, helping people, preferably children. I supported her. I paid my tuition bill, books, and other college necessities. Susan really tried her best. She reduced the number of hours at Walmart and then quit altogether in order to make the most of her time for classes and studies. It worked. College education is usually designed for 4 years. Susan finished it in 3.5 hours. Everything looked good and really wonderful. That is, everything seemed good to me. Susan, at some point, began to come up with other ideas. Is anyone surprised? Since it all came out, I remember reading about it. I've read about it on the internet and in several books. I accidentally purchased additional materials from a public library and a local bookstore. Come on, I may not have graduated from college, but that doesn't make me stupid. Around the last year of studying with Susan, I began to pick up subconscious signals. The usual things. Anyone who has ever been there knows what I mean. Eye-rolling, stating a fact or evading legitimate questions, disparaging remarks, condescension, and what I would call hypercritical behavior. Who was Susan trying to fool? Gradually, she came to believe that, thanks to several college courses and several term papers, she had become smarter and outgrown the man she had once loved, but who was still a source of income for her. I was watching her. At first I didn't pay attention to it, but when she got worse, I got angry, but I realized pretty quickly that my anger was in vain. I was just learning it anyway. Then my anger turned to sadness. Of course I loved her, but I was young. If she had apartment fever and wanted to leave, I would be sad, but I would have dealt with it. That's probably all that happened. So far, I've just been chatting nonstop. I'll try to tell you as much as I can about how everything finally started to fall apart. It was quite recently, maybe a year ago, on a Tuesday evening. I got home late and Susan was waiting for me there. She was sitting at the kitchen table in our first rented house, in which I repaired floors while doing shared equity construction. I walked in the door and saw her. She started, "Chase, I know you're tired, but we need to talk." I knew this would happen. I even knew who my sworn enemy was. I pulled out a chair. It's all used furniture. "Okay, honey, how are you?" "Chase, I know we're married, and I know I promised, but I'm unhappy. I want to start dating other people, other men. It was cool. I expected her to ask me for a divorce, but she just ran around and said she wanted to date. Did she think I was some kind of fool? Some kind of weakling? I sat for a while. I was tired, really exhausted, and I was going to do something like what she was up to, and if we did, she would cry and I would just get angry. It didn't make sense. I needed to answer, but first I had to pull myself together. I just sat there for about 5 minutes, drumming my fingers on the table and staring at her. It had two effects. It helped me keep my composure, and it scared her. I waited, and of course she couldn't stand it and said, "Oh, I don't mean love or anything like that. I just want to leave. You know, I've met people who have the same interests as me. Some of them get together and hold, well, group discussions, intellectual events, intellectual classes, group discussions. It was stupid. There were no group discussions, and there were no groups of people. It was one person, a psychology teacher, not a professor. A teacher at a local college. I knew him, and I met him once or twice, a nice guy. His name was Ryan Fletcher. He thought he was handsome, and I think he was. He was about my height, but he played sports, jogged, was in a sports club, and he wore tailored clothes, drove a sports car, if that's what you call a Mustang latest model sports car. He drank wine and mixed drinks, but I didn't. I haven't drunk anything since high school, not even beer. Come on, Susan wasn't my first girlfriend. There were others I thought I loved too, especially one, but I thought Susan and I had something. I thought I was moving towards having a big house and children of my own. I would be glad if I had a little girl who looks like Susan, and maybe a couple of boys who look like me. I thought that's what all people wanted. I thought that's what Susan wanted. I think so. Becoming impatient and perhaps a little cautious, she looked at me more closely. I don't mean that I want to leave you, Chase. I love you. I really am. I'm serious. And I still do. I just want to be out in nature more often and do other things. Diversify. Be more cosmopolitan. I listened. Finally, I answered, "Do you want to get a divorce? This is all?" And so it was. I dumped it on the table. I thought she would either pounce on it or leave it lying there and sniffing. She decided to let him lie down. She leaned back in her chair. Yes, I caught her doing it. I saw how worried she was. She turned pale and then blushed. No, I want to stay married. I don't swear. My mom and dad raised me right. I replied, "You just want to make love to Ryan Fletcher, isn't it?" This time she blushed to the roots of her hair. No, I'm loyal to you. I will remain faithful. I just want to be out in public more, to meet new people. She hesitated. She realized that I knew more than she thought. "Why did you mention Mr. Fletcher?" I thought, "Mr. Fletcher, isn't it? I bet it was Ryan, or Ryan Honey when it was just them." I yawned and stretched. "Listen, I'm tired. I'm going to sleep. You'll decide what you really want and tell me about it tomorrow night," I added. "Why don't you call your lover Ryan if you need any advice?" Then I continued, "Oh, and no love tonight. You're probably full anyway." I got up and went upstairs to go to bed. I assumed she followed me later. I don't remember falling asleep right away. Well, not quite right away. I thought a little about things. The next morning, I got up at my usual time, and she was already in the kitchen. She made coffee. I rarely had breakfast. Most of the time I went to Dunkin' Donuts and bought a bun and a cup of something else on the way. Susan had never disrupted my daily routine before, so I wasn't expecting anything this morning. She always cooked dinner for me, and it was nice, but nothing more. I was right and wrong this morning. I went downstairs, and she was awake and waiting for me. She said, "Look, honey, I was wrong about what I said last night. I want to take back my words. Let's pretend I didn't say anything. I'm happy with you. I don't care about anything else." She stepped forward. I think she was expecting a kiss or a hug, which is unlikely. I gave her what I hoped was a casual smile. "It doesn't matter. Will you be home tonight?" She became very serious, pretending to be sincere. "Of course, I'll be home." As I walked out the back door, I paraphrased what I had said the night before. "Well, talk it over with Ryan and tell me what you've come to tonight," and walked down the path to his truck. As I was leaving, I heard her say outside the door, "Chase, I'm not dating anyone, and certainly not with Ryan." I just turned around and waved as I got into my truck. Who did she want to deceive? On the way to work, I started thinking. Now I think that this should not be done before work, since a lot of work depends on accuracy and safety. Thinking can get in the way. Nevertheless, it was a cool 40-minute trip, and I decided that I could think a little bit, and then, getting to work, put everything on the shelves. I'm not an engineer, but I can think analytically. I've narrowed it down to 4, maybe 5 topics. First of all, I had pride. I always thought I was enough for Susan. Combined with that, I think I had faith in her maturity and self-awareness. If I wasn't enough and I don't think about love, damn it, I'm only 26, there's no problem with that, then it was something else. Damn it, Susan could use some help in a love affair. That's another story. Of course, it had to be that college mystic. Guys like Fletcher were sophisticated, and I was just a carpenter. It reminded me of an old Matt Damon movie, Good Will Hunting. There was a scene where Matt used a college guy alone in a bar, but in that movie, Minnie Driver saw through the hypocrisy. In my case, Susan was too immature and too enthusiastic a star to see the difference between the tinsel that Fletcher was and what was in me. It probably pissed me off that she couldn't see it, but there was nothing I could do about it. Worse, if she doesn't see it now, she'll never see it. It hurt. I loved Susan, but I knew that no matter how it ended, if not now, then someday she would leave with someone behind my back. Now, secondly, what she said, and obviously what she was doing emotionally, if not physically, made me feel incredibly sad. I hated to admit it, but last night, lying in bed alone, and this morning, it was like watching someone slowly disappearing into the distance. They get smaller and smaller until they are no longer visible. I think it's like death. She was moving away. What Susan and I had was dying. I saw it and I felt bad. Thirdly, I think there was some concern about what others would think. I thought about it, thought about who it might matter to, and immediately discarded it. I liked her mom and younger brother, but it would have been their loss, not mine. My parents and brothers would be worried, but once they find out what's going on, they'll calm down. Only my colleagues and friends are left. I don't care about them. If it comes to a divorce, which it probably will, they won't take sides, and if they do, it won't matter. Then the financial issue had to be resolved. We didn't have much money and we didn't have children, but in the event of a divorce, my new business could require me to pay alimony in one form or another, at least until Susan got back on her feet. I didn't like the sound of that, but I figured there were ways around it if I could find the right lawyer. And finally, what about my personal well-being? I mean, I would certainly be heartbroken. Damn it, I've already been killed, and I'd be lonely too, at least for a while. Although, again, no, maybe I wouldn't do that. I married Susan because I loved her, but I've had other girls. There was one, Ginger McAllister. I proposed to Susan, but Ginger was in second place. Even better, during my marriage, Ginger managed to get married and divorced. I not only thought, I knew she got married because I got married. She jumped into bed with another guy without thinking. I wondered if she ever thought about me when she was in bed with her husband. I bet I thought so. I know I was thinking about her. Ginger was a nurse at a local hospital. She had a job, and she had warm feelings for me. I knew she wasn't dating anyone, and she was free. I had a good alternative, and maybe a better choice. Sometimes it happens. So I came to work, had a good day, and went home. When I got home, Susan was there. She cooked a delicious dinner, and we ate. After dinner, I brought up the subject. Well, Susan, what have you decided? She reached out and took my hand. I love you, Chase. I'm sorry for what I said. It was stupid. I guess I just didn't think about it. Then, I said, these group discussions and meetings with other men are not discussed. Oh, Chase, she began. I never meant anything like dating. I meant talking to other men in group discussions. I didn't believe a word of it. He and Fletcher came up with something, but I didn't want to cause any problems. They would have done so. I said, listen, Susan, you have a degree in psychology. Soon, as soon as you find a job, you will use it to help people. I don't want to stand in your way. If group discussions, or whatever they are called, group seminars, will help you prepare better and maybe find a job, then you should go for it. Do you think so? What is it? She asked. I gave her what I hoped was an approving but thoughtful smile. If you think it's a good idea. She crossed the distance between us and climbed onto my lap. I don't think I need to do something like that, but thank you for blessing me. I love you so much, darling. And with that she kissed me hard. To be honest, I thought I had just given her carte blanche. Now, I bet she could go and jump into Fletcher's bed if only I didn't find out about it. I groaned. Listen, honey, I'm very tired, and a truck with supplies will come for me early in the morning. Would you mind if we put it off for one more night? Susan wrapped her arms around my neck. She kissed me gently on the lips. No, honey, we can wait. And then I realized. From now on, all that remained was to find a way to catch her. I stood up, kissed her again, and whispered, Okay, sweetie. I love you too. For the next few days, throughout the weekend, life went on in much the same way. I returned home after sunset, went straight to bed, got up at dawn and worked tirelessly. All this time, business has been bothering me. First of all, Susan never found a job. I was sure that he and Fletcher had made love while I was at work, and no less unpleasant was the thought that what I thought I once had was no more. I assumed that sooner or later, I would have to pull myself together and do something. In the end, I decided to make up my mind. I made one difficult and quick decision. I was sure they were meeting somewhere. I just didn't know where exactly. If they used my house, I figured I'd cut Fletcher's brains out. If they had used his apartment, motel, or some office in college, I wouldn't have been half as worried. In the same spirit, I appreciated the fact that it was not about Fletcher, but about Susan. Of course it was Fletcher, but if it hadn't been him, sooner or later it would have been someone else. Oh, Fletcher was a bore, a scumbag, a tough frat boy who easily found a job at a small college, out of nowhere, but the problem wasn't with him. I needed to find out something. First, I called my lawyer and made an appointment and a plan of action. Then I looked up the local directory and found Fletcher's address. Then I looked through his papers, a master's degree in psychology. After all, it's not that much, is it? Susan's car, her little Nissan, had a GPS. I decided to use it to track her movements. I could keep an eye on her without looking up from my work. Susan also had a mobile phone. I could connect to it and read all her messages. All I had to do next was collect some data and wait for the right moment. When I hired a lawyer, he explained that if we could get Susan to sign a divorce, I probably would have to pay something, but I could keep her out of my business. Otherwise, he said, I could just declare bankruptcy and start over after the divorce. I know this is an oversimplification, but it seemed to me that it sounded right. Damn it. I heard that one guy started over 4 times. I could have done it once, and the only person I would have fired would have been myself. It wasn't quite like that. A few guys could have been hurt. It turned out to be easier to follow Susan's actions than I thought. She left the house every day around 11 a.m. and either headed to the local college or went straight to 13710 Maple Crest. Ryan Fletcher's apartment was located in the Maple Crest area. He lived on the 3rd floor of an apartment building that was part of a complex built in the 1970s. These were once beautiful places, but now they have changed significantly. I wondered if Susan understood what she was messing with and who she was messing with. Given his qualifications and what I learned about college salaries, this Fletcher was probably at the lowest level. He probably earned about half of what I was getting. Worse for Susan if she's not careful. Of course, it was a stupid thought. By that time, I was already on the rise, and Mr. Ryan Fletcher was probably already close to his peak. Come on, I looked around, and Susan's choice of profession wasn't so much bad as pointless. There were plenty of psychologists with Susan's level of training, and Fletcher was only a step above her. In a way, it only made me feel worse. Susan wasn't stupid. She should have realized that Fletcher's prospects were not so bright. Was she really in love with this guy? And if so, did she fall in love so deeply that she was willing to give up the comfortable life I could provide for what would at best be a life of noble poverty? Was I really that bad? No, I didn't think so. I thought Susan was in love with the concept, the idea. Instead of spending the winter in the Bahamas, which is an exaggeration, of course, or maybe enjoying trips to big cities for shopping, theaters, and concerts, or just having fun spending all the money I earn, she would prefer to drink a cup of coffee or glasses of cheap wine, sitting and talking about how gifted and intelligent they all were. Well, the choice is hers. One useful thing I've learned from my electronic tracking is that it doesn't look like they're using our house as a love nest. But there is one unpleasant thing, really unpleasant, that caused me a lot of pain. It's her text messages. I am not and have never been what I would call an overly sensitive or thin-skinned guy. Growing up with 2 older brothers negated all that, but her messages were painful. They really hurt. I've read that the words spoken by an unfaithful lover were rarely true. It could have been, or it might not have been, but it didn't matter. The words she said to Fletcher hurt, they hurt a lot. They were like a knife in my heart. A deep wound through which what was left of my love just flowed out. So this brings us back to the night it all started. It's time to pull the trigger. As I said, I have discussed everything with my lawyer. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. If Susan needed a guy with a sheepskin coat, she could get him. I would have gone further. I would have been fine. So before I went to bed, I left a note on the table. I wanted to get this over with in the morning before I left for work. That's not how it happened at all. I was about to fall asleep when I heard the sound of a car, and then saw the lights when Susan pulled into the driveway. I looked out the window. It was Susan, and she wasn't alone. I pulled on my shorts over my boxers and trudged down the stairs just in time to see Susan and Ryan Fletcher enter the front door. Wow, I thought. What is it? Susan saw me and I cringed a little. I also noticed how Fletcher squeezed her hand, either in gentle reproach or as a sign of support, as I assumed. Susan looked up at me. I was still on the stairs. She said, "Chase, I'm glad you're still awake." I nodded. "I see you've brought a guest." By that time, Susan was already holding the guy's hand. "Yes, Ryan and I would like to talk to you." Oh my God. I thought, the chickens have returned home to roost. I grinned at him. Did we win the lottery or something? Susan tried to put sincerity on her best and well-rehearsed face. "Chase, please come downstairs. We need to talk." Without saying a word, I slowly descended the stairs. Whatever it was, and I kind of knew I wasn't going to make it any easier than necessary. I got to the bottom of it. "Okay, what's the matter?" Susan replied. "Can we go to the kitchen?" I said, "Sure, why not?" As we entered, I surreptitiously looked Mr. Ryan Fletcher up and down. He looked like he was expecting something, maybe trouble. I laughed inwardly. He was really ignorant. We went to the kitchen and all sat down at the table. It was their show, so I waited. After about a minute, Susan began, "Chase, I'm kind of leaving you." Gee, I thought, how can you kind of leave someone? I did my best to keep my face as expressionless as possible. Judging by the expressions on their faces, I think I've succeeded. I replied, "How do you want this to happen?" Fletcher opened his mouth. "Susan and I have been thinking." I interrupted him. "This is between Susan and me right now. When we're done, you two can pack her things. I'll even help." I looked at Susan. "So how are we going to do this?" She looked surprised and offended when she said, "You didn't have to tell Ryan that. He's only here to help." Oh, I could have said a lot right then, but I remembered the movie The Godfather. Never let others know what you're thinking. As calmly and evenly as possible, I said, "You said you were leaving me. I understand. He's here to help. I understand that too. He can help you pack your things when you and I are done. And again, my question is, how do we do this?" Susan was on the verge of a breakdown, and I remembered my conversations with the lawyer. He said that when the bullet hits the bone, Susan might crumble, and I might have to push her. "Pride works in two ways," he said. Susan said, "I don't really want a divorce. I would like to have the opportunity." I stopped her. It was hammer time. "I agree," I said. She was surprised. "Do you agree? What do you agree to?" I replied, "I really want to get a divorce. I've already met with a lawyer. He completed all the documents. We'll sell the house. We have no equity, so we will probably lose money, but I am ready to cover any losses. About things, most of them are used or old. I have a couple of things, and so do you. We can choose the few things we need and either sell them or give the rest to charity. About the money, if you agree to just let me go, I'll divide what we saved 60 by 40, and you'll get 60. Susan was stunned and just couldn't find the words. Then Fletcher intervened in the conversation. "Susan loves you. She doesn't want a divorce. She just wants to be able to see me and maybe take a few trips." I ignored him, but responded to his remark through Susan. "I said I wanted a divorce, and then I lied. I found someone else. I want to move on." She looked startled, absolutely amazed. "Have you found someone else?" I stuck to my version. "When I found out about you two, I realized that everything was over between us, and I moved on. And now, Susan, will you let me go?" "You are welcome. It's all about Ginger McAllister, isn't it?" Susan retorted. I had it in my hands. As the old saying goes, pride destroys. Susan was angry. I cut her off at the pass. I struck a sharp blow. Yes, she was on her guard again. My answer? I would prefer to keep silent. In a cobra-like tone, Susan hissed, "All right, Chase. You got it. Ask your lawyer to send his documents, and I'll sign them. I'm freeing you." I got up. "I'll call him first thing in the morning. I'll personally make sure you get them tomorrow. I suppose you'll be at Ryan's." Susan, squaring her shoulders, flashing her eyes and bristling, replied, "Yes, I'll be at Ryan's." I said as if nothing had happened, "Okay, then." I looked at Fletcher. "Maybe it's time for us to get ready?" He looked like he had been struck by lightning. That's when I realized that Susan had screwed up. He said, "Well, I guess." I said, "Okay, let's get started," and looked at Susan. "You pack your toiletries. Ryan and I will take out the rest of the stuff." After that, everything went pretty quickly. Susan took her perfume and soap and put them in her travel bag. Ryan and I took all her clothes to the car. It was a little cramped, but we managed everything in less than an hour. I walked them to her car with her things fully loaded. He got into the passenger seat. I held the driver's side door open while Susan climbed in. She rolled down the window. "Chase, I'm sorry. You know, I really love you." I honestly confessed, "I know." I watched my wife and her boyfriend drive off into the night. I went upstairs, checked Susan's empty closet, and looked around the room. Everything was the same, and at the same time everything changed. I looked at my watch. It was 10 minutes past 1. I took out my phone and called Jack Slattery, one of my employees. "Jack, I won't be here tomorrow." "Yes, Susan and I have agreed on a divorce, so I'll deal with it tomorrow. Can you take care of everything for me?" He apologized, but also promised that he would figure it out on his own. I knew he would do that. Was that the end? Well, yes and no. Let me explain what happened next. At first, I cried for most of that first night. I owed it to myself and to Susan to cry properly, to get it out of myself, so to speak. After all, I really loved her, and I knew that, despite the circumstances, she loved me, but she just didn't have the strength of character to control herself. The next morning, I met with my lawyer, at least with his secretary. I took the documents and went to Fletcher's apartment. Susan opened the door. Ryan was still asleep. I assumed she had a lot to go through. I saw that she was crying too. She didn't even read the documents, but simply signed them in all the places indicated by my lawyer's secretary. 15 minutes later, I left, essentially a free man. What happened next? A lot. I did an appraisal of the house and found that it was worth even less than I thought. Instead of putting it up for sale, I met with my parents, took out an interest-free loan from them, and after my brothers agreed, of course, we didn't want family quarrels, I bought out Susan's half. I agreed to leave Susan in my care and pay for her phone for 6 months. I decided that was enough time to give her time to settle in. She hadn't read any materials and didn't know anything about it, so I got away with it. I threw myself into my work. I worked as hard as I could, and in a short time my results were better than ever. Then another circumstance arose. I needed to get on with my personal life. I went to visit Ginger. Susan was a stunning beauty. Brown hair and big brown eyes, a gorgeous figure, not too good in bed, but stunningly attractive to the eyes. It wasn't like that with Ginger. Ginger, of course, was pretty, short like Susan, with red hair, freckles, and green eyes. But that was where the comparisons ended. Ginger was flat as a board, skinny, and her legs were like sticks. Worse, while Susan, for all her womanizing nature, ended up being quite meek and easy to get along with. Ginger was the complete opposite. I remembered her quick temper, outbursts of outright anger, and a penchant for unexpected violence. One thing I remember for sure, Ginger, when she was with me, had outbursts of jealousy bordering on fits of rage. Yes, and I would never have to worry about her playing Fletcher. Did I want to go back to that? The answer? Yes. I realized early on that Susan was at least boring. Ginger was a fiery volcano that was always on the verge of erupting, especially when we were dating, and especially when it came to me. In fact, as soon as she realized that I had chosen Susan, she almost threw herself at her. I want to see Ginger. God, what a wonderful name for a girl with that kind of looks. I called first. She wasn't thrilled to meet me, but eventually agreed. We agreed to have dinner together. I took her to the Olive Garden. I took her hands, and God, I'd forgotten how gorgeous she could look. Her hair was braided in a long braid, big green eyes, light brown eyeshadow, long eyelashes, small delicate hands. Nails were covered with transparent varnish, and the clothes on her were just killer. She was wearing a lemon green silky button-down blouse, made of some thin material that made it seem like her tiny breasts were just flowing. I mean, they're rippling like waves breaking on a beach. I swear she wasn't wearing a bra, and the top 3 buttons were undone. The skirt she was wearing was made of the same light pleated fabric and reached only to mid-thigh. When walking, it just fluttered around her slender legs. Her slender legs were shod in knee socks, and her feet were in cheap moccasins. It's just adorable. And what a face. Heart-shaped, teardrop mouth, slightly upturned nose, high cheekbones, with a scattering of freckles that stretched across the nose and cheeks like a tiny mountain range. And then she opened her mouth and I fell in love again. Oh, how could I forget the melodious intonation of her soft, gentle voice? It was like a spring morning, like the singing of a songbird, like the joyful lyrical song of a nightingale. She was pretty silent until we entered the restaurant and sat down at the table. Then she said to me, "What?" she said. "Are you tired of this beauty, and you decided to come to me? Back to second place?" The nightingale turned into a hawk. It was great. I liked. I blurted out in response, "That's right. Now how about this?" She literally hit a nerve with me. "You know I've been married before, so you missed my chance." I remembered that I was Catholic to the core. I didn't take any action when we were dating. I replied, "It's all right. I won't be in a hurry. She still hasn't finished. There's no turning back this time." "A penny a pound," I replied. "I take what I can get, even if it remains in stock." And then it dawned on me, yes, and she finished me off completely. "My first marriage was a failure," she said. "This time I want to go to a fairy tale." I was ready. "Do you want to eat first, or should we go pick out a ring?" She jumped to her feet, laughing. "Come on, asshole. We got married in the fall. A grand wedding. As I said before, I'm a Catholic, I have a big family, and great hopes. I was a Methodist, so it didn't matter. She was a wonderful bride." The tiny waif was led to the altar by a red-haired giant, who himself shone like the lighthouse of Alexandria. I haven't looked back since. I made one mistake and I won't make another. So what happened to Susan? Ryan wanted her. He loved her, but he just wouldn't marry her. Poor silly Susan. She resorted to the oldest and stupidest method she could think of. She stopped taking the pills, thinking that if she got pregnant, he would marry her. She got pregnant, but he went to the mountains.